Thank you, Ilse. Welcome everyone to tonight's class on understanding value and light using gouache. So this is a standalone class. You can join even if you didn't attend our class last week, but if you do struggle with the drawing aspect of this class, then you might want to check out our class from last week, Understanding Light and Value in a Landscape Using Graphite. Where we basically did a graphite study of the image in black and white and inverted light that we're going to be painting tonight using gouache. So, but stick around even if you missed that class last week, you can still, follow along with us tonight and then just check that one out if you struggle with any of the drawing aspects, but I think you'll be okay. It's a pretty simple little landscape here, but there are a few aspects of it that I might make some callbacks to last week. And then before we get started, I did want to just talk about some upcoming classes that are on the calendar in May, because since we switched from doing these weekly on Wednesdays or 4 Wednesdays a month, now we're doing 3 Wednesdays a month, and they're 90 minutes long to give us a little extra time together for each class. But we have one less class each month, so that just means when we have 5 Wednesdays in a month, there's a 2-week break. So we won't be back again. I won't be back again doing another class until the first week of May. So since there's a little break, I just wanted to tell you what's coming up in May. So I've got this fun class on sketching flowers in white charcoal using just one white charcoal pencil on black paper. So white charcoal sketching flowers using white charcoal on black paper, I believe is the full name of that class. And then we've got some really fun moon drawing and painting classes. I've got the sketch for the moon here, but I thought I would just go ahead and show you the painting of the moon in ink. And it's in this little folder, but it's going to be the last guy I pull out. Here we go. We're going to be working up to this fun full moon painting in ink at the end of the month in May. And then before that, we've got a class on sketching in graphite as well of the moon, which I marked in this sketchbook and then promptly moved my Post-it from it. Here we go. So we're going to be using some really fun maps of the moon that I found online with NASA, those government documents that are available to all of us to use as references. So we're going to be looking at some specific lunar maps to help us identify all those craters, because I'm an astronomy nerd and I just think they have such beautiful names, and also they help us to be able to, map them out, to draw them. It helps to look at the names and the labels. So we'll be looking at that and doing this little series of mapping out all of the lunar craters, and then we'll do a more extensive sketch of the full moon. So we've got that class that will happen the week before the class when we do the moon painting in ink. So that's exciting. Oh, and I see I have one of my students from one of my in-person classes, Katie, joining our Zoom tonight. That's fun. Yeah, if anybody else, we were talking about it in my in-person class this morning, joins from the class, just holler at me. I might not see it in the chat, but I love that just popped up in my little pop-up chat there. Okay, so I'm going to switch to my tabletop viewer. Thank you, Ilse, for spotlighting that and working with some different technology tonight than usual. Okay, so this is what you may have at the end of tonight's class. Results may vary depending on where you are in your art journey, right? So, but we may have something that looks like this by the end of the class. And just before I talk about supplies, don't forget to tag your work with those hashtags, Make It With Michaels or Michaels Classes. You can also use the hashtag Learn With Michaels or follow at Learn With Michaels on Instagram as well. And then I'm on Instagram at Adrienne Hodge Art. And if you go to my Instagram and then click on the link tree, which is that link that I have on the main page of my profile there in my little bio, I've got some links to sign up for upcoming Michaels classes or in-person classes with me in the Austin area. And then I also have this weekly draw club that I'm doing, and I have class recordings available for those draw clubs. And I also have some really fun ones coming up on the horizon that I'm excited about. So check that out if you haven't already. And then I'm also on Facebook, Adrienne Hodge Fine Art. Here's some of my business cards using some of my artwork using calligraphy ink. Okay, so we are using acrylic gouache tonight. We're using this little Holbein set that comes with primary colors and black and white of acrylic gouache. And acrylic gouache is just like other gouache, except for one thing, well, two things actually. So, I mean, all gouache is going to have this matte finish to it. That's kind of the main difference, one of the main differences about gouache compared to watercolor or ink. And I actually happen to have this fun class. This is looking way ahead into June, but I don't know if I checked today and I didn't see them posted on the Michaels website yet. I just submitted this class, but in June, I'm going to have this fun little class where I look at the differences between watercolor, gouache, and ink. So you can kind of see it right there, like comparing watercolor to gouache. The watercolor has a little more transparency. Gouache is a little more opaque. You can get, you really can't deviate too far from washes with gouache. You can get it a little more thick and direct, and you can get solid values to happen. But you can really get these opaque layers to happen with gouache. And then it has that matte finish to it. Most gouache can be reconstituted once you start using it. So if you have it in your palette and a couple weeks have gone by, with most gouache, you're going to be able to add water to it and continue using that paint, except for this kind of gouache. So this acrylic gouache has an acrylic binder in it, a polymer binder, and so it's going to behave more like acrylic paint when you put it in your palette, and you're not going to be able to add water and reuse it, down the line. So once it's dry in the palette. And but it does, because it's got that polymer binder in it. This is actually not the acrylic gouache here, but this is. So I don't know if you can see a difference between the two of those, but it has a little bit more of, what you might expect. I don't know, it really doesn't though. I mean, I guess it's really just what the binder in it. It does have a little bit more of like a sharp graphic feeling to it. And I definitely leaned more towards the acrylic gouache for a long time when I first started painting with gouache. So I really love this Holbein brand. So that's kind of all I have to say about it. Just if you're curious about why the acrylic gouache, I think it has a really sharp, like it has that illustrator type quality to it that I really enjoy. So, okay, enough about that. But it's interesting to me to talk about the differences, and I happen to have that handy reference now for that June class that's coming up in a couple of months. Okay, so you can get through this entire class this evening using 3 paintbrushes. If you've got a flat brush, a rounded brush, and then a, sorry, this is actually the one I'm looking for, something like this. It's a little bent, but it'll straighten out once I get it wet. A liner brush like that. And the paintbrushes that I recommended are on the supply list, but I know not everybody's going to have the exact same paintbrushes on the supply list. So as long as you've got a liner brush, a flat brush, and a round brush, you should be good. And then I have a couple of other brushes here, like I've got a Filbert. You can see the full list of materials listed there on the, if you're watching later on YouTube, it'll be in the YouTube, notes under the video. You can also find our reference photo there where it says see more. You click on that and it'll give you the full list of materials. And then for those of you in the Zoom right now, our lovely moderator Ilse just dropped it in the chat again for you. Okay, and then you're going to want a watercolor sketchbook. I've got this lovely, let me see if I can not bump my camera here. This Strathmore watercolor sketchbook here, which is really nice. And then I've got a couple of water cups, which I am just not going to put under my camera today because it's a little lower than it usually is. I've got some blue tape. I've got a pencil on hand so that we can write our text in here to make it look a little fun and fancy like that. We've got a couple of palettes. You really are going to probably want two just so we can spread out, but one will be fine if you only have one. I've got a paper towel, and then we've got the reference photos. So let me pull those up real quick. Are there any questions about supplies? While I pull up my reference photos here. Okay, so we've got those reference photos of the inverted light, the black and white, and then the true color just to have it there, but we're mainly going to be looking at the black and white version and the inverted light here. Okay, and then we are using a really interesting palette tonight. So we're not really going to need our yellow out of this set, but we're definitely going to want our magenta and our cyan and the white and the black. But if you did want to try some different colors, if you wanted an extra challenge here, I'm going to show you, I did this twice and I used yellow and green. So I had to mix the green from these primaries using my yellow and my blue. And then I primarily used yellow for all of a couple of different yellows for the light values in the black and white, and then a couple of different greens and black in the dark values on the black and white. And then I inverted it. So I used, I tried to stick to yellow. This is why I ended up moving away from this color scheme, because I ended up covering up a lot of the lighter values with white, which is a nice thing about the gouache. You can use that white is so opaque and you can cover up your mistakes. That's definitely one advantage that gouache has over watercolor. But in the end, I decided to do this with one of my favorite color schemes to use, which is this pink and blue and a little bit of purple. So that's what I'm going to use. If you want to get experimental and try like more purple and pink, or really you're just choosing two colors. You're going to choose a dark color and a light color. So here I've got obviously blue and pink. There's a little bit of purple in there. But if you wanted to mix up an orange and do this with a lot of red and orange and maybe some yellow. So yellow and red will make orange, or yellow and magenta. So you could kind of use those three. You could use more green and yellow, or you could really push the violet a little more, or you could even just stick to black and white. So if you're really struggling with the color mixing here and you feel like the colors are getting away from you, you might start over and just use black and white. Or if you wanted to really simplify what we're doing tonight, then I would just use black and white and make a grayscale for yourself. Okay, so I'm gonna flip to a new page here and go ahead and set up for this sketch. So I'm gonna use some tape so that we can get this nice little clean edge to happen here, and we want to have a couple of squares because our image is square. So if you happen to have a Post-it nearby, like I do, we can just lay a Post-it down side by side and use our Post-it to draw a couple of boxes, and then we'll tape off those boxes. Or if you want to just sketch a couple of squares, they don't have to be perfect, and then use your tape to get them nice and straight. That's another option. I always feel like crediting my friend and fellow art teacher in the Austin area, Jenny Granberry, for this little hack of using a Post-it note to draw nice, clean boxes in your sketchbook. She used a business card, and I thought that was such a nice little trick. All right, so I've got my boxes, and now I'm just going to take some tape, although maybe I should have left a little more space in between those because my tape is not that wide. But I like the way that looks as a frame, so I'm going to leave it like that and just work around it. I might have to cut my tape a little bit here. There's several reasons that you want to tape off your margin here like this. The main one being that when we peel the tape off, we're going to have this really nice clean edge. And so, but if you decided not to tape it, you would have, it might look kind of cool to be a little, you know, sketchy around the edges and the corners there. But the other reason is, you know, it just helps you like stay within a frame. It really elevates it to have these margins. I think having that clean edge can just take a maybe mediocre painting or sketch and make them feel fancy just because they're in a nice little clean edge frame like this. So I'm just using some of my torn tape to get that to fit in between my space there. Totally did not plan for that to happen. I just was not thinking. I think the last time I put the tape down the middle, I think I made my boxes happen the last time by just putting the tape down. This might take me a little bit extra time, but it's worth it in the end to have that fun little satisfying frame in the sketchbook page. Nope, that's a little too thick. I'm just really trying to be a problem solver here with my tape. All in the name of not redrawing those boxes. Because I like the negative space on the side of the paper. I'm almost there. Oh my goodness, that's good enough. Okay, one more little piece in the middle there, and that should be good. Okay, so now that we've got that taped off, we'll go ahead and just sketch in the main idea of this landscape. So you're not going to be able to see my pencil lines. If you're just joining and you missed out on the sketching part of the class and you're struggling to sketch this, then just do your best. And you can go check out that class from last week that covers all of the sketching aspects of it, but we're just looking for the bare bones of this image here. So we're not putting any details in, we're just getting the main idea of the tree line and the road. And maybe don't even sketch the truck in, just maybe leave a little gap on that side rail for where the truck is gonna go. Or you could draw a little box in there, or you could go ahead and draw it because it's a pretty minimal little thing. I'm just gonna get the main idea of that little truck in there. Okay, and then these rocks coming up the side, just the general mapping out and blocking in of all of those shapes. And then there was that little bit of clouds coming into the top frame. And then we'll do the same thing on both. So both of your sketches are going to look pretty similar, or they are going to be similar. Nothing's really different in the empty sketch for these between the inverted and the black and white light. It's the value shapes that we put within them that will be different when we start to paint them. I'm just kind of doing a side by side, like glancing at the two of them once I get them sketched and just see that I've got like the tree line coming in the same spot on both of them. That way, you know, the impact of the two of them in the sketchbook feels nice and aligned. I'm just kind of eyeballing where I did the corner of the guardrail, etc., trying to get that pretty similar in both of them. Like I just realized I drew the rocks a little bit different than that other one, so I might adjust it. The rocks start, it's like they're coming out of the center of that truck. I'm gonna put them in the same spot on both. Okay, and I'm just gonna add that center line in the road. Maybe go ahead and put both of those big oil stains on the road in there. Just leaving them all empty. Okay. And it really honestly does not need to be perfect because our gouache is going to cover up almost everything that we have in our pencil sketch. Oh, I should go ahead and put those clouds in there in this one too. Okay. Now let's go ahead and start mixing up our palette. If you want to test your colors on a separate piece of paper, then, you know, you can do that maybe on the opposite page in your watercolor sketchbook, or you can, you know, do it on a separate page out like another piece of watercolor paper off to the side. So we're going to be looking at the black and white photograph first. And we've basically got, like, let's count the number of values that we have here. So we've got the absolute white, that would be 1. We've got the absolute black, that would be 2. If we've got that value scale from 0 to 10, then I like to refer to the 10 as or the absolute black as 10 and the absolute white as 0. So we've got our 0 and our 10. And then on that value scale, I'm seeing quite a bit of a mid-tone, and I'll call that a 5. So for that mid-tone, you maybe might want to use the secondary color that you might get if you mix together two of these primaries. So if you were using yellow and blue, then you might have some green in there, right? Or if you wanted to do, you know, green and yellow, then you decide that way. But since I'm using pink and blue, I'm going to use purple for some of those midtones. So I'm going to sneak in that third color, that purple in there. So that's our third value. So we've got black for the absolute black, white for the absolute white, or maybe our lightest pink is what I'll do. And then purple for some of those midtones. And then for like my anything between like a 8, 9, like close to 10 on the value scale, I'm going to use my bluest blue, just my blue out of the palette, or sorry, out of the tube here. And then I'm going to use pink for some of my lighter tint. So I'm not going to use a whole lot of just straight magenta. The magenta is going to be pretty minimal. So it's going to be mostly pink and blue, a little bit of purple, and that's going to be it. And yeah, I guess I didn't use too much white. So I'm not using white, and I'm not using a whole lot of black either. It's really just in some of those moments, I might add a little bit of black to make it a darker blue. So if that's too confusing for you to apply like the colors that I'm mixing to your own color scheme, like if you're trying to do a different color scheme than me, then just stick with the same color scheme that I'm doing. And the easiest way to do this, like I said, would be to just use black and white, because then you're just matching the grayscale that you're seeing here. So you're mixing a dark gray for where you're seeing dark gray in the shadows. You're mixing a light gray for where you're seeing the light grays, and you're using white and black for your lightest and darkest values. So any questions about that before I start mixing up some blues and pinks here? I'm going to just look at the chat real quick and see if we've got any questions about the color. And I'm not seeing any. Okay. So yeah, don't overthink it. I mean, we're going to kind of just follow the values that we're seeing here. And if it's confusing, then to mix the colors, just use black and white so that you simplify it. So I'm going to squeeze out quite a bit of white since we need a lot of pink here. I said that, and then I didn't squeeze out very much white. So let me squeeze out even more white there. And then just gonna have a tiny bit of black. All right, so I'm just gonna use a small medium brush like this Filbert brush that I had on the supply list here to mix my colors up. I'm gonna take my white to a few different places on my palette so that I can keep one puddle of paint that is just white. I'm going to clean my paintbrush in between my colors here. You want to start with the lightest color and then slowly introduce any darker colors, because the darker color is always going to eat the lighter color. So I'm just going to slowly introduce some magenta to this white, and then we get this nice light pink to happen. And I usually do have folks paint a little swatch off to the side. I'm not going to do that this time since we're using such a limited palette, but if you want to do that, then please do that. Okay. And then I want to make a couple of different pinks here. So I'm going to have one that's a little bit more of a medium pink like that. And then I want one that's a really pale pink. And then I'm going to add a bunch of water to that. So you can just take your paintbrush and just keep dipping it in your water and dropping your paintbrush over the color that we just mixed. But I am going to use this little eyedropper because my phone is in the way. My camera is in my way of doing that with my paintbrush. So I'm just going to add some water to both of these, and we're making a wash. So even though we're going to end up with a pretty thick layer of this gouache by the end of the class on these little studies, you still want to start with a pretty light wash when you're starting with gouache. It's going to give you a lot more control. So I definitely did that with, these examples of the strawberries. I started with really thin washes on all three of these because you do the same thing with the ink. And I actually have some other examples. I started to do this with some poppy flowers. You can kind of see like this is probably the second layer of watercolor. I just decided this image was maybe a little too complicated for this demo and ended up using the strawberry instead. But you can see I started super light with the gouache and with the ink. All three of these mediums, you want to start super light and washy with them and then build up to details. It just gives you more control. Okay, so I've made a wash of those. And this is why I said having two palettes is a good idea, so we can spread out and make a few different washes here and then, switch to our thicker paint. All right, so we'll take some blue over here and clean our brush again and go ahead and make a nice wash of blue. So we're not adding any white to our blue. So our blue is our darker value and our pink is what we're using for our light. So in this black and white image, we're making the dark shadows, everything on the shadow side of that grayscale. We're making it blue or maybe purple. And then we're using pink for the lighter values. And if you are using, yellow and green, excuse me, or, yellow and orange, basically just whatever the darker color is. And if it's confusing, like with red and blue, sometimes people are like, well, how do you know which one of those is darker? And you can just think about if you mix the two of them together, which one is going to dominate faster? And it's the blue. The blue is going to dominate the red before the red will dominate the blue. So whatever color is going to eat the other color more, I mean, you can just mix them together and observe it to see if you're confused. Okay, so I've got a wash of blue, a wash of pink, and maybe let's go ahead and make a wash of our violet too. So I'll just demonstrate that. If I take my little bit of my magenta, my water just turned a nice shade of violet since I had all that pink in there and then added some blue to it. Okay. And then I'm just going to water that down so that I get a wash of violet. While being very careful not to bump that camera. It's very close. I had some technical difficulties with my webcam this evening, so I'm using my phone as my camera tonight. I thought it was my dongle that was giving me issues, and it might not even be the webcam. It might be, if anybody knows something about glitchy cameras in Zoom, feel free to share your expertise. I'm going to do some research later and figure that out. Okay, so we've got a wash of pink, a wash of blue, and a wash of violet, and we're ready to just fill in our first layer here. Okay, so on this small scale, things should dry pretty fast. And actually, we're going to do this. We're going to take our flat brush and we're going to paint just water over both of these. So we're going to paint with water over the whole thing. So things might bleed together a little bit here as we drop these washes in, but that is okay because it's the first layer and we're going to cover it up with our next layers, and the gouache is so opaque it can cover things up. So we're just getting some initial values going. So I'm going to do my black and white version on the left here. Okay, so I'm not going to be able to have my image on the screen while I'm painting, but you should have the image handy there. Okay, so we're just following what the light is doing here. We're not having to think too hard about the light. Hopefully this part is not too much of a stretch for you here. So we're putting the light pink everywhere that we're seeing the light areas. I'm going to put the purple in the mountains, mostly just so I can have a little bit of separation between the mountains, the trees, and the sky, because with this color scheme, sometimes you can run into things getting a little muddled that way. So I'm having that violet come in to create a little bit of a separation there. And I'm also going to put some violet on the rocks, and then I'm going to put blue in the tree line. And also I'm going to put blue in the clouds at the top. So I'm just dropping in using my little round brush. And I'm dropping in a little wash of blue in the clouds. I'm going to kind of bounce around a little bit so that things to limit the amount of bleeding that's going to happen between these colors. And this is also hopefully going to start to illuminate what I'm trying to get across with this exercise in regards to the light. We did it last week with just the graphite, just seeing how those different value shapes stand out in a little value study like this, and then limiting the colors that we're using and applying this sort of color scheme like this is another way to just understand what those value shapes look like, their importance, and how effective you can be in creating depth and perspective by just noticing how dark and how light things are in a study like this. Like even in a class this morning, somebody was showing me a landscape they had been working on, and it was a very dark photo, and everything in the painting had been kept pretty light. And so there was a lot of like more the midtones between on that value scale. There was hardly any absolute white in the painting and hardly any absolute black. And so there wasn't a lot of contrast, there wasn't a lot of depth. And the more you push the drama and this contrast like this, the more you're going to create depth. So understanding light and value in a landscape is also a way to understand depth in a landscape. All right, so I filled in that blue. Now I've got my pink. And I'm just filling in my light pink wash on the road. And I might even just go ahead and fill in this entire bottom area, except for the guardrail over here on the right with that pink. And it should spread around nice and easily since we've painted the paper with water first. If you had too much water, it might be bleeding a lot. So if that's happening, you just grab it out with a paper towel, give it a second to dry, and try again. And we're going to bounce back and forth between the two of these little studies. Last week we just did the black and white and then finished it and then went on to the inverted light. This one we're going to go back and forth between the two of them. So that was another reason doing that study in graphite is helpful, because hopefully it won't be too confusing going back and forth between the two. But while we're letting this one dry, we'll work on the other one. Okay, so now I'm using my light wash of violet. I'm going to switch to a smaller paintbrush here. Go ahead and put in that violet and just do it on the entire mountain here. Even though we're going to end up adding pink or blue. I'm like, was it pink or blue? Hang on, let me look at it. Well, it's lighter, so we're going to end up adding pink. But I don't know, I just thought adding a little bit of purple would separate it nicely. I'm going to pull a little bit of that out with my paper towel. And then add that purple on the rocks as well. And then I'll go back to my blue for my rail, little guardrail over here. And then the truck is pretty dark, so we'll go ahead and put blue. It might bleed into the rest of it, but that's okay. Go ahead and get some paint onto every surface there. Okay, and then now let's look at our inverted light. And we'll do the opposite. So we're going to add our light pink on the trees, light pink on the car, light pink on the clouds there at the top, and then blue to the sky, and blue to the road, and then our violet. Like, oh my God, I have to think for a second. Like, did I use violet in the inverted one? I think that's where I used the dark pink. Yeah. Maybe let's take the violet out here. And I did use it a little bit on the mountain, but I think that's where using the dark pink instead of the violet. Or you can use the violet. It's up to you. I'm going to let it be up to you. Guess I could reverse it. I mean, that's the whole point, is to reverse it. Adding the violet really like threw my brain for a loop the last time, and yet I still decided to do it again. I'm really just kind of using it as an accent color, if that makes sense, just to give it like, you know, some separation so the blue and the pink don't get too lost in there. All right, let's start with the easier one. So we're going to put pink in the clouds. And yeah, if you're using your own color scheme, then you're having to do your own mental gymnastics about what accent color you might use. I mean, it's not that challenging. It's just you either do it or don't. Sticking to two colors or sticking to the black and white would be the easiest. I'm excited to see what y'all decided at the end when you show me your examples. I hope at least one person is challenging themselves to do a different color scheme than me, just because I like to see it. I think it's fun when there's a different application of what I'm doing, even though it's fun to see the replicas of my examples as well. All right, so I got pink in the tree lines, pink on all the trees and the clouds, and then I'm going to use my wash of blue for the road. I'm trying to stay away from things that are wet while they're still super wet. That's why I'm jumping to the road and not the sky right now. And I'm looking at my reference image as I'm doing this, because I'm constantly second guessing myself when I'm working from an inverted light photo like this, and that's why it's such a good exercise. Because if you're not struggling a little bit, you know, hopefully you feel supported and comfortable in your struggle. But if you're not struggling a tiny bit, then you're not learning. That's called doing what you already know how to do. So if it's a little bit frustrating and a little bit confusing, that means you're learning. So that's good. Okay, now up here to the sky. I'm just being a little careful not to touch those clouds too much so that it doesn't bleed while it's all still fairly wet. Okay, now this is the moment of truth where I'm like, do I use purple or do I just stick to the pink and the blue? I think I'm going to do it. I'm going to use the purple, but it's going to have to be reversed. So if I put it in the kind of the background on the rocks, then now it means the purple is like the highlights or the accents, what's showing up as black in the inverted. So I would want, I guess, more pink under there. So I'm just kind of doing that to help me visually think. I think I'm just going to go with pink for now, even though it's going to end up having a little bit of reversed purple in there. Okay. And then I'll put pink in the guardrail. Okay. And then, yeah, the car with the truck is mostly light now since it's reversed. All right. So we got the first layer down on both of them, nice and light and washy. Now we'll go back to the black and white image and start putting in some thicker layers of our blue and pink and purple. So let's mix up a little more pink because I turned all of mine into a wash. I probably didn't need to make that much of a wash, but I did. I want a couple of different pinks here. I want one that's a little bit on the darker pink side. And then, yeah, if you didn't want to use the purple, you could just use the magenta instead of the purple. Like because we're using the blue straight out of the tube, but then we made our magenta pink. So that magenta out of the tube would contrast the pink instead of the purple to give it some accents as well. That's another option. And then we'll make a lighter. I'm already making all my whole pile of white pink here. So we want this layer to be a little wet. We want it to be a little fluid, but not washy. So I'm just adding a little bit of water to it just to keep it moving around. And my instinct is to make more of both of these just because it's always a bummer when you run out and have to mix more halfway through. But then if you make too much, then you might just have a bunch left over. So, but I'm going to go ahead and just make extra. that darker pink is like our Barbie pink there. Okay. So you got a nice little pile of a darker pink and then a nice little pile of your lighter pink. And they're both have a little bit of water to them, so they're fluid, but not a wash. So that we don't want them watery like that last layer. And then I am just gonna have to keep cheating y'all and looking back and forth. So a part of me is like, maybe I should just take the purple out since it keeps confusing me and just use my two different pinks here. That would be the simplest thing to do. I think I'm going to do that. Maybe I'll add the purple at the very end as an accent, but I want to speed things up a little bit. Okay, so for all of my light areas here, I'm using either dark pink, light pink, or the magenta. Okay, so on the road, it gets, it's mostly light, but then we've got these little oil stains, these little streaks that would be maybe the darker pink. So let's use our lighter pink first. Just cleaning my brush to get that darker pink off of it. And my apologies for bumping this camera so much tonight, y'all. It is just really in my way. Okay, so I'm going in on my, actually I'm going to start on the sky. So anytime we're painting something that's all connected like a sky, we want it to feel continuous and connected. So we want to use, like if you start going in with these horizontal brush strokes, you just want to keep them nice and horizontal the whole time so that the sky feels like it's all one thing. And I went in pretty thick with that gouache that time. And that is fine because I do feel like we're running low on time here. But if you wanted to take your time and build up with like a more not so thick layer, but if you wanted to do what I just did and go in pretty thick, just the sky will be pretty much done. After this, we'll just want to add those blue clouds on top, but we're keeping it nice and uniform. So I'm like kind of dragging my brush across horizontally to keep the sky all connected like that. Okay. And then likewise with the road, I'm just going to go around those little oil stains on the road and I'm following the contours. And if that's confusing, you can refer back to last week's class where I talked a lot about the contours as we were sketching it. I'm just going around the areas where that darker pink is going to go and following the contours of the road. And then I'll go ahead and put this in on the rocks. So I'm going to end up adding that accent of darker pink and magenta on top of it, but I want this base layer of lighter pink. And it could be tempting to just like quickly fill in this whole thing with the lighter pink without following the contours. But following the contours is going to give you, you know, the illusion of depth. So same thing over here in this grass with the lighter pink. I'm following the contours in that area. That elevation will shift. Okay, and then we could just, while we already have it on our paintbrush, go ahead and do our light pink over here on the inverted one. So I'm going to do that just because even though it's going to be more of a stretch for our brain to go back and forth, it's going to be the best use of our time and our paint here. So I'm gonna start filling in actually, let me start with the clouds. The clouds, I'm just kind of keeping a little roundedness to my brush as I'm filling in that thicker pink on the clouds. And then paying attention to those contours of the trees. So those kind of cone shapes of the trees while kind of guiding myself down in this diagonal path. And in other classes, like we had that mushroom class last month on we using gouache, I talked how using pen and ink shading techniques are really great for painting with gouache because you're just kind of filling in that area with more like hatching, cross hatching brush strokes. You really don't need to maybe use your paintbrush in a way that you might be used to painting with other mediums here. You can just use like little hatching lines, cross hatching, stippling, and scribbling. Think about those sorts of brush strokes. Okay, so it's pretty light on that entire tree line. I mean, it all ends up looking like one big mass there, but knowing that we used those brush strokes is gonna come across. And also we want to keep that energy when we start adding those more detail marks that show the highlights of the trees. So I'm just kind of using a little hatching brush stroke that like a little flick of the wrist to make it follow the contours of the tree that's sticking out over here and also creates a little bit of texture. And also one thing that's tricky about gouache is it's hard to lose the visible brush stroke. So by just embracing the mark making that you're doing with your paintbrush with the gouache, you kind of use that to your advantage and let the visible brush strokes be there instead of trying to camouflage them. Okay, I somehow missed an area right here with my wash of blue. I'm going to go ahead and make my more direct fluid blue here. And then bounce back over here to I realize I missed a couple spots, but I'm going to go back to the black and white one now and start to fill in that tree line with my thicker blue, and it might be easier to see the kinds of brush strokes that I'm talking about here. So if it helps to even like go down the line and sketch in with your paintbrush those cone shapes of the trees, we also need them to stick up a little bit. And this is the reason why it's good that we painted the sky first, because then we can go over the sky with our trees, and we're going to add some details in a bit to get those little sticky outy moments to happen. But I'm just carefully creating some little pointed triangles that are sticking up, creating that like heart rate monitor shape, and then keeping in mind that cone shape of all of the trees as they overlap going down this line. So yeah, this example is going to look a little bit different since I'm deciding to just not mess around with that purple accent this time. And I am kind of starting in the darker shapes, the darker areas of black that I'm seeing in the photo, and then spreading out from there. And I'm using my wash of blue that I have in my palette to just make that direct blue more fluid. And I'm constantly looking at my reference photo, even though it's off the screen. Hopefully you're doing the same thing. Right. Another thing about gouache that can be a little frustrating for people to adjust to, and is something I have to constantly remind myself of. It looks so much different dry than it does wet. So that can be, exciting if you just decide to think about it as exciting. It can be kind of fun to watch the transformation that comes over it as it's drying. And sometimes those visible brush strokes resolve themselves a little bit. They're not quite as distracting as they might be when they're dry, but that's not always true. So, you know, embrace it. I'm gonna go ahead and put in some of these little dots for some of these leaves sticking out. I can't help it. I'm just using the tip of my brush. I'm like, why not? Why not go ahead and put those in there now? You could even go ahead and put them up here unless you wanted to use a tinier brush, but kind of like using this size brush because I can get some fat ones, I can get some thin ones. And we don't need it to look exactly like the photograph. We're just trying to get the idea of our reference image here. All right, and then we can go ahead and do our little cloud. It is so tricky to paint with this camera right on top of my paintbrush has to come in at an angle every time. Okay. I started to put blue on the road. I want dark pink down there. Okay, let me go hop over here to the inverted light one. So remember, we want to keep do our sky first, so we can do that. Well, we already did some of the tree line, but we're gonna, once this blue sky is, the dark sky is dry, we'll put those little sticky outy moments from the tree line on top. Okay, so we want it nice and fluid, but also let's go ahead and make it pretty thick. So this can be our second and final layer on the sky. Unless it looks kind of shabby in your example, then you let it dry and you do another layer. So hold off on the trees until you're satisfied with your sky. Once you do the trees, it'll be kind of difficult to put those little, once you do those little sticky outy moments of those treetops, it'll be hard to paint the sky in between those. You'd have to redo them anyway. So you want to be done with your sky before you add that. I'm just trying to keep it nice and uniform. All those brush strokes nice and flowing together. which is a little tricky because I'm curving my lines around the clouds and around the mountain top here. But then I'm coming back on top of it and keeping the idea of the pen and ink shading techniques, the hatching, cross-hatching, stippling, and scribbling. So I'm using these one directional hatching line brush strokes to get it to be nice and uniform. And this blue is a little transparent, so it definitely wants to show those brush strokes. But we're going to trust that some of that might disappear when it's dry. And just get it as uniform as you can. And then we'll leave it alone. Okay, and then I'll come down here to the road. And following the contours here on the road, maybe it might be better if we followed the horizontal flow of the contours here first, since that blue is so transparent. And then come back on top of it with more of a diagonal. That way we get that kind of flatness to come across. So this straight horizontal brush strokes follow those contours that show that the road is flat, and we talked about that last week when we mapped it out. Definitely would be easier to do another more transparent layer and then let this dry and then come back in on top for a third layer with more thick paint like this. So I am cutting corners a little bit just because I don't know, I think I talked too much at the beginning of the class about what's coming up in the weeks ahead, and I don't know, but we're running a little short on time, so I'm trying to speed it up a little bit here. And if you make any mistakes, like I just caught a little mistake that I made in covering up that one of those lines a little too much. That's the beauty of gouache being so opaque. I can just wait for that to dry and I should be able to cover up anything that feels a little wrong in proportions there. I went ahead and put the little line of the truck in there. All right, then I'm gonna go ahead and put in some of these like dark values that are popping up just while I've got the blue on my paintbrush. Why not go ahead and bounce around and do some of that? So everywhere we're seeing some dark in the inverted light, we can go ahead and put in some blue. And yeah, this is what I did. I used the purple for some of these accents, but I decided not to do that this time. All right, let's bounce back over to the black and white version. And actually, I might go ahead and put another layer on my clouds up here. So you can see how different it looks when it dries. So the lighter values will dry darker and the darker values will dry lighter. It's weird, but once you know that, you just, like I said, it's a fun little surprise sometimes because you know it, but then you forget it. And then you're like, oh, right, that's going to look a little different as it dries. Okay, so now I'm going to take my smaller brush and go ahead and do some of these smaller details with the blue, like the guardrail here, but I'm following the contours. Oh dear. I had some water on my paintbrush that dripped down. So yeah, the washier you stay in this process, the more control you're gonna have. If you're finding that you're not having a whole lot of control over the paint, next time you do this, keep it super thin. The longer you keep it thin, the more control you're gonna have. But like I said, for the sake of time, I've gone in pretty thick, pretty quickly here. So it's just more time consuming if you go slowly and keep those washes thin until you feel more confident to go in with the thicker paint. But once you've gone pretty thick with it, then that's kind of where you stand. So I'm looking at some of these details here, following the contours as I'm filling those in. And go ahead and fill in my truck. I feel like I should be talking more about the differences in the light here, but like I said, this whole thing is just an exercise and a study to help you understand light and value, which is the same thing, essentially. Well, value is the representation of dark and light. But when we talk about value, people tend to think more in terms of the shadows. There's a lot of focus on shadows for beginners in their art practice, and they don't spend as much time looking at the shapes of the light as they do the shadowy shapes. And so doing this little study like this where you reverse it, it really helps you to one, to see those value shapes, primarily just see them, just be able to identify them and notice them. And then yeah, and then just recognize their importance. And oh, I just saw Katie's comment, baby dragon value shapes. Yes, thank you for that, Katie. That reminds me. Yeah, if you're having a hard time seeing them, this morning we were looking at a portrait, and the nostrils in the photograph that we were looking at sort of looked like a little, like the shadow I wanted everybody to notice. I was like, what else could we identify that shadow as? And I said, it kind of looks like a little sleeping baby dragon. And for some reason, calling a shape something other than, instead of saying like, we're going to paint the shadow on this truck at a distance here, saying I'm going to paint the shape of, I mean, it's pretty simple shapes. It's a rectangle with a couple little rectangles off of it. But if it was a more organic shape, like let's say, I'm looking at maybe some of these rocks here. Like as we get into some of these rocks, you could see what sort of shape do some of these rocks look like. And you can call them whatever you want. Like maybe this one kind of looks like a little flamingo to me right there. Like a flamingo driving a car. That's what I see. I don't know. Whatever you want to identify it as. Like this one could look kind of like a vase, or this one might look like a triangle, whatever. This one kind of looks like a little baby gorilla cub, or gorilla, a little baby gorilla. That's what I'm seeing. Anyway, whatever you have to call them to help you paint or draw those shapes. Sometimes calling them something other than what they are. Like instead of, I'm trying to paint this mid-tone value on this cliff face, this rock on the side of a cliff. That sounds really challenging, but I'm going to paint the shape of a flamingo driving a car here. For some reason, it makes it fun. We're gamifying it. That was another thing we talked about this morning. And gamifying things, making them more like a game, can sometimes take the the hard work out of it, or oftentimes does. It just frees you up to be in the moment and let the flow of art making happen. All right, let's see what's next here. So let's stick to the black and white here, and let's use this darker pink and magenta for some of these accents on the road. And this was where I was contemplating using purple, but instead I'm just going to use my darker pink. So for the oil stains, and if you're struggling to, oh my goodness, so sorry, bumping that camera again. If you're struggling to get some of these small details in on this small scale in a sketchbook, if you're working in the same size sketchbook as me, then maybe try this again on a bigger sheet of paper. I mean, the only reason to do it in the sketchbook is I think it takes the pressure off in some ways doing it in a sketchbook, because we can think about it more as practice in that way. But if a bigger sheet of watercolor paper makes it easier or just makes more sense, or maybe some of you are already doing that, then by all means do what is going to make it easier for you, because it's definitely taking some extra dexterity at this scale. And then especially when I have to avoid bumping my giant phone above me. Okay, so I'm putting in some of those accents on the rocks. And I mean, accents on rocks don't necessarily have to look exactly like you're seeing them. I was just using those as an example of some interesting value shapes that you might name in that way. Okay, so this value that we're putting in on the rocks, this mid-tone, happens to match the mid-tone value that we're seeing on the highlights in the trees. So we're going to come up here and put those highlights in the trees too. And this is the thing I love about gouache, is how it just kind of sits there. You can really stack it in a way. And this color scheme, I just love how these colors pop against each other. Those of you who have been taking these classes for a while with me might remember I did a Posca marker class last year. It was one of the premium classes, so it wouldn't be on YouTube, but we did a similar study of a landscape using Posca markers, and we used the same exact color scheme. We used blues and pinks, and we added some accents with purple. Okay, and then we've got those trees on in the distance on the mountains here. We'll use that darker pink, and we could come in with the lighter pink again and do another layer. But since wow, we're really running out of time here now. Okay. Also, I have to remind myself it's okay if I don't finish. I feel like I've gotten us far enough here that you'll be able to complete this on your own, even if I don't get my second demo here all the way complete. So yeah, we're basically just everywhere we're seeing the highlights in our black and white, we're putting those in with pink. Or maybe you might come in again with like a darker blue with a little bit of black added in there. Let's do just a little bit of that, because that's going to create some high contrast here. I don't know why I moved that off screen. Yeah, let's add just a tiny bit of black to our blue. Might have to jump to my more completed example here in just a minute. I'm going to give myself 3 more minutes to fuss around with this, and then I might jump to my completed example to finish talking about what you'll need to do to finish it on your own. Okay, but yeah, that black will just, since we're talking about the value so much here, and this is likewise with the inverted one, you might add some white if you're really just not feeling the depths and the contrast, going a little darker in the dark values. And again, looking at those shapes. So I think the way I described them in the class last week when we were sketching them was like kind of a zipper pattern, like an alternating zipper pattern going up and down here to get those darker shadows in between. And doing this does like stand out quite a bit. So you might want to come back in with that blue and touch the edge of some of these darker values, or you might wait for it to dry and it might, not feel so stark against it when it's dry. But that's just going to really push some space back by adding those darkest darks. And you can do the same thing in the inverted one, although there aren't a whole lot of moments that I think that blue looks contrasty enough against the pink that we don't need that quite as much, but you might want to do that with like an even lighter pink or a white, some of those highlights instead. Okay, so let's go in with well, first let's get those trees in there. That's going to really make this one pop out. Those tree details that we needed the sky to be dry before we did. Now my pink is all dried up, my light pink. All right, so now that my sky is dry, I should be able to go in with this light pink and do all those little sticky outy leaves. And you might need a couple of layers of these, or just go a little thicker. Like I had to water down my light pink, trying to speed it up here a little bit, but then now it's too transparent. So let me go ahead and just mix up a little more pink so it can be nice and thick. And I accidentally made it a little bit of a darker pink. This was supposed to be still my light pink. But while I have that darker pink, so I want lighter pink up here so it matches the majority of the trees. Since in the inverted light image, it all kind of, gets washed out like this. I'm going to take the time to go ahead and make that lighter pink. You'll say, are you okay if we go a couple minutes over?
Yeah, no worries here.
Okay, cool. I'm going to plan on doing that then, because I'd like to see some of y'all's examples. And we're really coming up on the end of the class here. Okay, so ideally, we've already got that mountain going in the background, which I just like completely left it out in the inverted one. Because then we want the trees to go in front of that. I'm gonna do just the darker magenta on the mountain range there. There's a little voice in my head that's still telling me to put the purple in. even though I keep resisting it. Mostly because I just think the pink and blue and purple just looks so nice together, like it's a full color scheme. Okay, yeah, if anybody else needs to run, you'll have this recording later on YouTube to watch the last few minutes here if you need to go. Totally understand. So yeah, some of these like little highlighted moments on the side of the railing, like this needs to be blue right here, but you want to like really pay attention to these details in the inverted light. So like everywhere where you're seeing white, put some pink in there, and that's going to create that contrast that you're looking for. So like over here on the railing, and if it's not high contrast enough, then that's when you can add some white to really make it pop even more. And then once we've got the mountain in there, then we can, oh my goodness. Add another little drop of water. You can come in and do your little leaves that are sticking out here. And ideally, all of this is dry before you do this. I mean, I'm really forcing things here for the sake of time. But when it's dry, it's so much easier to just stack these layers on top of each other. So if you're running into these issues, there is no reason for you to rush, and you should just wait for things to dry and then come back in on top of them. Okay, that's a good place to stop for now. I mean, I want to get all these lighter values in, but I'm going to bounce back to my other example here real quick and just show you how I put that darker magenta in you know, the darker moments of the light areas, and then mostly it's a lot of that light pink. I did add that little bit of the accent of purple there. Yeah, and then when you're done, when the whole thing is done and it's dry, I'm gonna risk it, even though mine is not dry, and go ahead and peel off the tape. But you really want to wait until it's totally dry to do this. I think it's dry enough. I think it's dry enough at the edges anyway. But definitely don't peel off your tape if you're not done, like with the sky and the clouds and things that are coming up near the edge of the tape. But you should have a nice little value study there to appreciate in your sketchbook. And you can write in at the top with your pencil, black and white, and inverted light. Having that little text there, I think really makes it pop, although I should really have a darker pencil that shows up better here. All right, y'all get the idea. I think we covered all of our bases. And we are just 1 minute over here, so if we can spend one more minute and hold up some of y'all's examples. I'd love to see where y'all landed on this. There's Barbara's. Oh, I love that orange tape, Barbara. Wow, you did a really small scale. So you're using a lot of very intricate dexterity with your hands there. But yeah, look at all that detail on that small scale. That's impressive. Really nice. Well, there's Arthur. Hi, Arthur. Haven't seen you in a while, or maybe you just haven't been holding up your examples in a while. That's lovely. Um, yeah, that looks really great. I love all that dark magenta there. It really, side by side, these just pop so much. And I see that purple you used. Looks really nice too. Oh, there's Gouty. Oh, Gouty, that's lovely. Yes. Oh, I love how you stayed nice and washy. Yeah, take your time. I love how that sky is looking with that little soft blend of of pink and blue up there, and the way you accented with the purple is gorgeous. Heck yeah, ma'am. I love it. Okay, and there's Juan. Oh, Juan, you went blurry. Oh, and you got some different colors going in there. You got some orangey red happening. Yeah, that really creates some contrast, that color. That's nice. I love your brush strokes too. All right, there's Glennis. Oh, that's beautiful. I love that side by side on each side of the page. Yeah, really nice blues and pinks. Oh, and Dorothy, you did the orange and yellows and a little bit of blues in there. Yeah, orange and blue, the complementary color scheme. I almost suggested that, but I was like, I thought that might throw some people off. That's a more complicated color scheme to combine, but looks so nice. Contrasting complementary colors like that. Great idea. Lovely. So yeah, for anybody watching this later on YouTube, if you haven't started yet, you could try orange and blue, red and green, yellow and purple. Those would also be really nice contrasted colors to use for this light study. Thank you all so much. Please sign up for those classes that are coming up in a couple of weeks, and check out my draw club if you haven't already. I'd love to see y'all in this time off between the next Michael's class in May. Have a great rest of your evening. Good night, and thank you, Ilse.